So today we're going to be talking about ministering to boys. And just as a kind of a note to start, there will be, because we're talking about boys and therefore we'll be talking about girls because you got two genders, there will be some generalizations that I will make. And these generalizations are things that I have learned along the way, things that I've been taught and have experienced for myself to be fairly true, fairly accurate. They're not always accurate, they're not, in every circumstance accurate, but just to start, as that prerequisite so that you're not like, oh, this guy's way off, there are generalizations, and for the most part, I believe they're true. So hopefully you'll follow along with me along the way. And if you don't, that's all right, because I won't ever see you nod off or kind of go, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, so I'm going to turn this off. It won't hurt my feelings because I'll never know. So I also won't really ever know whether you laugh at any of my attempted jokes. So don't worry about that either. But yeah, so in ministering to boys, what we want to talk about today is just, boys are an interesting breed. I know this because, well, first of all, I'm a boy, and a lot of people actually tell me that I'm still just a big boy in a man's body, and I would tend to agree with them. But I also know that boys are an interesting breed because I have a couple of my own, and there's actually some pictures behind me that just show my boys. And one, I have an older son, his name's Riley, and then a younger son, and he's Ethan, and they are a lot of fun, and as you can tell, and so just from firsthand experience, and then also from ministering to boys and girls for the last 8 years at a church called Christian Life Community Church in Abbotsford is where I've kind of learned the differences that boys and girls have, and the need to minister to them in light of their differences, in light of their physical, brain, behavior, that sort of realm, their needs, that whole realm, and just seeing that there's a need to actually be very specific in how we do ministry for boys and essentially girls. And so today, what is the goal? My goal in this time together is that our desire, if we think about our goal as pastors, as leaders, whether it be children, preteen, or youth pastors, our goal inevitably is to help raise boys and girls to genuinely own their faith and to enjoy being in the presence of their Savior. That's really, I think, most of our end goal is to make these kids want to own their faith for on their own, and to enjoy being with their Savior, enjoy being in a relationship with Him. And so the big idea from that is that they got to buy in to own it. Boys, girls, they need to buy in to own it. To own their faith, they need to be able to buy in to what's being presented. They need to be able to buy in to what this whole idea of the good news is. And so our part to play in all that is essentially helping them do the buy-in, helping them be able to understand what it's about, helping pique their interest, helping show that show the truth, and doing it in a meaningful way that they can then connect, that they can register and go, that is something I want to live my life for, right? And so that's the idea. And so ministering to boys, what I found in all this, and I'll explain this further later, is in essence, to minister to boys well, it actually ends up being just learning how to better balance in ministering to boys and girls. And because the question comes, well, why are we even bringing this up? Why do we need to find ways to get guys to buy in? And the answer, I feel personally, is that our church programs are, whether Sunday morning, whether it be children's programs, whether it be youth, whatever it might be, they tend to be a little bit more geared towards females' natural giftings. And what I mean by that is that girls are more naturally gifted at paying attention, sitting quietly, listening and learning in kind of a classroom setting. They're also more talented and gifted in naturally discussing their feelings, just discussing topics in general and staying focused, staying on task. And so boys aren't really buying in and therefore aren't owning it. And so, in general, what we're seeing, girls tend to be stronger in building their faith, especially at younger ages and even at older ages. They are growing their faith and owning it more naturally, partly because of what we're providing, the opportunities that we're providing. And so to offset that, not to take that away from girls, but to balance it better, is we need to find ways to get the boys to buy in so that they will also own their faith. And, this isn't the case for everyone, but girls from the beginning are better at talking and listening activities. Guys from the beginning are better at physical and tangible activities. One of my favorite examples of this is something I saw in my own son. We were on our way to the Sunshine Coast with my family to visit my wife's family, and we're on the ferry, and we went into the little kids play area, and we showed up, and my son was 2 years old at the time, just my oldest son Riley, and he was a beast of a boy, just like a tank, and and I was very proud of that. And he showed up, and there was these little boats on the carpet that you could sit in or push around or whatever, and they're fairly big, but my 2-year-old son went and found these things, and he just starts hauling them across the floor, and and I'm like, I was so impressed. I was like, man, that's my boy, shoving this thing around. I'm like, yeah. And so we're hanging out for a little while, and I look over, and there's this mom and this little girl, and the little girl looked to be about the same age as my son, Riley, so about 2 years old, and I'm watching her just sit there, just pleasantly sit there with a little bowl of grapes watching a TV show, and I'm like, there's a difference there, a very obvious difference there. On top of it all, this little girl, she looks over at her mom and she goes, "Mommy, I'm done with my grapes now, thank you very much. I would like my blankie, please." And I'm like, maybe I got this wrong. Maybe she isn't 2. And so I look at her. I look at the mom, and I'm like, how old's your daughter? And she's like, oh, she's 2. And I'm like, my goodness, my son, he's the typical caveman. He's got he's pushing things around and moving boulders, and he's like, oh, food, give me now. And this girl has this full-on vocabulary. It just blew my mind away. The same age, and it was funny watching them interact, because he saw that she had some food, and so she's like, "Mommy, what is this boy doing?" And he's like, food, and you're just like, they're very different. And so from that, our programs, we have to be very cautious in our programs, because there is an importance to teaching, there is an importance to discussion, but we also have to see, okay, in light of our boys, how do we do that in a way that they are going to be able to register it, to buy into it? And boys have a very specific brain behavior connection with things, and as do girls. And it's important for us to understand how both function and are more susceptible to learning. If we're wanting to teach them, we need to figure out how is it best going to be for them to learn. And then work accordingly. And one of the differences we have to be aware of, and which shows up in this, in even the talking or the physical, being more, kind of what we would call masculine, comes from hormones. And just being aware of, the two prevalent hormones that we have, and the difference between guys and girls is testosterone and estrogen. And the big thing about testosterone is that it's called the social dominance hormone. It's a hormone that's very hard to understand, because where people typically look at a boy and go, why is he doing that? What's gotten into him? It is this this specific hormone, testosterone, that is making them amped up, wanting to conquer the world, wanting to take over and be adventurous. And again, that's not to say that girls aren't interested in that, but we see pretty much double the amount of testosterone in boys than we see in girls, scientifically, and that plays a big part. So then, from there, again, that's just in a physical realm saying, in a scientific realm saying that we need to work, we need to see how we can incorporate this. So to get boys to buy into a personally owned faith, do we need to do everything differently? Do we need to do everything differently from what we're already doing? Do we need to do everything differently from what we do with girls? Do we separate the two? Where do we go from here? I think no, we don't do everything differently. We don't separate the two. Personally, that's how I feel. That there needs to be tweaks and little twists to what we are doing, but no, it doesn't have to be like absolutely rehauled. And it's crucial to know where both sexes connect. That's really the reality. When we're doing a co-ed program, when we're trying to disciple a co-ed group of people, we need to see how both sexes connect, because they do connect differently. There's something beautiful about the way God has made man and woman. And when we see, I love looking at the differences between guys and girls, because it reflects our Maker. And you see characteristics that are that come from our Maker, and there, we get to see a holistic picture of who our Maker is by looking at both sexes. And so how do we connect up with both of them? How do we hit both of them on their dialect, their language? The better our ministry will be. And really, we drop the ball when we are too focused on guy-oriented or too focused on girl-oriented ministries or programs, and or any kind of process. And again, by default, we kind of are more girl-oriented if we just kind of do things the way we typically see it done, classroom settings, these sorts of things. And if you came out of this and went, oh, okay, yeah, I need to be more guy-oriented. If you went and focused too far on that end and just went, played in the mud and did all these gross games and just kind of walked around like cavemen, that would be detrimental to your ministry as well. And so, and often you can actually gauge, is my ministry more guy-oriented or more girl-oriented by who's coming, and more importantly, who's actively partaking in what's going on. Because who's coming is kind of a hard one. It does help, but at a children's ministry level, and even with a preteen, junior high level, parents are often enforcing their kids to come. So if you just look and you're like, oh, we got a pretty good mix, that's not the best gauge, because they're all kind of enforced to be there. What is a better gauge is like, okay, while it's going on, who's hiding in the corner and just like bored to death? Who's actively participating in the questions or in what's going on, the activities? And that will give you a little bit of a gauge. The sports activities. For myself, I've learned, I've done both. I've swung and been too focused on the guy stuff, and the girls lose interest. I've done too much girl-oriented stuff, and the guys lose interest. And so it's a matter of just, again, finding that balance, and that's really crucial. And one of, as far as gauges go, one of the beautiful thing about youth, just kind of as a side note, is that children and youth are very vocal about whether they are with you, whether they're into what you're putting out or not. They're very vocal about it, and it's very, they don't have that, as adults kind of create that polite factor of filtering. They don't have that, and that we can use that to our benefit. Most people find it distracting, or maybe disrespectful, but I tend to go like, this actually is helpful because they are actually giving me a real gauge, and then I can plan accordingly. I can evaluate and tweak. Okay, this is not working, or hey, this is working, because they will very much let you know that. Whereas adults, they just tend to, the more I teach adults, the more scary I think. Like people think teaching kids is scary, and I'm like, man, I can't even read adults. They could be nodding off and just kind of gloss look on their face, and at the end of a sermon or a teaching time, if they get caught in a room with you, they're obviously going to say, oh, really good sermon today, because they know it's the polite thing to say, and you have no idea whether they even heard anything you said. And so that's something that we can enjoy about children and youth, and so we got to take that with us. And I think on this two guy-oriented, two girl-oriented topic, we need to also be aware that there are times when it is beneficial to be gender-specific, and that is if you're intentionally doing it. If you're intentionally being gender-specific for a guys-only thing or for a girls-only thing. We actually have, I'm working with a group of guys right now that we want to do a guys-only conference. And so for any guys to want to show up, we have to make it guy-oriented. We have to make it so that guys are going to want to be there. And the reason won't be that girls are there, because they're not going to be there. So we have to focus on, how is this going to be, how is a guy going to want to be there at that? So that's when it is good to be intentional with that. On a caution note, there's been, as a kid, I was a part of a boys club, and there's different girls clubs and that sort of thing. On a caution in going, okay, well, if they're so different, why don't we just do a girls program and a guys program? There's definite cautions there, in the sense that there is something really important in guys and girls interacting. There's something really important in them interacting in everyday life, as well as in their faith walk, as well as just, one of the greatest mysteries of life is, what is the opposite sex thinking, and why do they think that way? So the more we separate them, the harder that answering that question, which most of us never even get a chance to fully understand, but the harder it is for anyone to even get a glimpse of that. And so we kind of, we shorthand them, or we shoot them in the foot if we separate them for everything. So what that looks like, so how we've learned to actually make that work, this balance of doing guy and girl only stuff, but yet still having this continuity, is that every couple months we do a guys only, girls only night. So specifically that night, the whole night is guys do their thing and they do guy stuff, girls do their thing and they do girl stuff, and it's just it's fun, it's wonderful, because you just you don't have to worry about doing the balance thing. It's just solely that. And then but then typically the rest of our nights are we try to make sure it connects our guys and it connects our girls. And then the other place that we're very intentional with guy and girl oriented is at the end of every day, and this is with our junior high, and I've seen it being done with kids ministries as well. At the end of our day, after I've talked, we break up into small groups so that they can discuss it, because we see, again, the value in discussing it. And we break them up into age groups, grades, and sexes. So the grade 6 boys go here, the grade 6 girls go there, seven boys, 7 girls, grade 8, and so on. And so at the end of every night, they are with people of their kind of maturity level for the most part, and their gender, so that they can then discuss what I've talked about, or whatever the speakers talked about, in an in-depth way with people of that group, and that happens at the end of every night. And so you get those opportunities to be more specific. And in those times, again, where you just see, I talk to my leaders at the end, and sometimes the guy leaders are all like, well, we talked about farting and cars and food. and often the girls, they are a little bit better at the discussion and staying on topic. But there are times when you get the guys that they are into the topic and they stay on topic, and some really valuable application comes out, and it's really neat. And part of that is we have also learned to be activity driven in our discussion time. So that's kind of how it looks for us, and it'll look differently for different people. So, so I've kind of mentioned a couple times, where are the areas they both connect? Well, so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. Where are areas that both our guys and our girls connect, where if we need to kind of shift the pendulum a little bit so that our guys are connecting, that guys are buying in, but yet that we're not losing the girls. Where are those areas? And again, these are concepts that I think that need to be implemented. The context is, you take, I'll give you some of my examples, but your context will look different. And so you take the concept away, and then you put it in your context. But I think one area that both guys and girls connect is stories. They love stories. Like, it's huge, the power of a story, whether it's personal, whether it's, you find it on Google, or, you hear it from someone else. Like, I even, as a speaker, I speak differently when I'm sharing a story than when I'm sharing truth or information, because there's just something inside us that we love stories. Why does Hollywood make so much money? Because they're providing us with stories, and kids love stories, both guys and girls, and so using those, and because they eat them up, and finding ways to do that. Also implementing visual factors, object lessons. It's very, again, that goes to the boys' tangible desire, that object lesson. Getting creative, using videos, PowerPoint pictures. These are all things that are really imperative to get boys on board, and you will also have the girls on board because they enjoy that too. Guys, they're super visual. You will lose them if you don't do it, but girls will also. So again, this is where both of them will connect. Something that I've learned along the way in all this is when I've prepared my sermons or my teaching time or discussions or whatever it might be, I always knew that you needed content and that you needed illustrations. And in my mind, I kind of formulated this formula of 75% content, 25% illustration. And what I've learned from listening to speakers that connect with youth, connect with kids, that connect with me, is that my formula is actually kind of reversed. Often it's actually really interesting as well that if you talk to youth, that they're like, man, I love this speaker. They are awesome. Usually you'll hear that's what you hear from youth. More than likely, you'll hear from adults going, man, that speaker really didn't have a lot of content. That speaker didn't have, it seemed really fluffy, like there wasn't a lot to it. And in my brain, I was like, yeah. But then, you hear enough of the youth and the children saying, man, I loved it. And you start going, wait a second, I can't write them off. Just because in my adult intellect I'm thinking, oh yeah, there wasn't enough content there. Because the kids are remembering what they're saying. The kids are walking away with that nugget that they gave. Even though it might have been just one point and a whole bunch of stories, you looked at, I started looking into the intentionality of it, and you had this big idea and all these stories that connected back to that big idea. And the reality was, people, good speakers that kids are wanting to hear and learn from are ones that are doing more of a 25% content, big idea, nugget of truth from God's Word, and illustrating 75% of the time with stories, with dynamics, with whatever else, so that, because our brains only remember so much, and if you can be really intentional with creating this thing, that and sometimes if you do it well, all that's needed is that 25%, because they're not going to walk away with much more than that anyways. Sometimes, they'll walk away with nothing. And so that's a huge thing. And because if you find a way to get them interested in a topic, you can get them to talk about it. And that's what I've learned. Because discussion, there's something important in not just hearing, but also dissecting it with dialogue and application. Application comes from, how am I choosing to act this out? And faith is very much an application issue. So how do we get them to buy in and own it? And the own it is the application. Well, we have to get them to be interested in what we're saying, to hear it, to pique their curiosity, and then to dialogue it. And so, again, boys and girls, how do we get them to dialogue it? We got to present it in a way that they are like, I want to talk about this. I'm excited to go into discussion groups and talk this out. So, and kind of lastly, in this, how do you connect them both, is a rule of thumb that I learned from Kevin Gear, who he spoke at Elevate, was it last year, and has spoken at a couple things, and so some of you may know him, but one of his rules of thumbs was this. He called it the grade 5 boy principle, where for their kids ministry, their oldest kid was grade 5. And so they said, they filtered all their activities, whether it be games, whether it be the talk, whether anything, they filtered it all through this grade 5 boy principle, because the way they saw it was that if you could get the buy-in from that grade 5 boy, the rest of the boys are there with you, and more than likely all the girls are going to be interested in it too. And I see a caution again in that, because there are certain things that we can get all these grade 5 boys into that girls would have no interest in, and so there is an importance in going, okay, right, I don't want to throw the girls under the bus, but there is that idea of, for the most part, if we can get our oldest boy interested in this, like using that as a filter, that is a good filter to use. And okay, are they going to be captured by this? And the reality is, there's a lot of things that we do that they aren't going to be captured by. I know this principle, and there's still sometimes when I try to get away with it, and I'm like, and my leaders are like, yeah, they were really acting up, and I'm thinking, yeah, probably because I didn't think, I knew, or I didn't think whether this was I didn't filter it through and see, is this going to affect, is it going to actually give me my grade 5 boy, or my oldest boy, is he going to be into this the whole way through? So hopefully that those gives you some pointers. The last kind of big point that I want to talk about in buying in to our and owning faith is something that I've really learned in the last couple. I myself have learned over since my own teenagehood, but never really knew how to put it into words until I found this book, and it's a book by Gary Thomas, Dr. Gary Thomas. It's called Sacred Pathways, and the point is that not everyone buys in and owns their faith in Jesus the same way, and so don't force them to. This Sacred Pathways, the concept of the book is that there are many pathways to connect with God. There's these different, if you hike a lot, you can get to a summit, but there's different ways to get to that same summit. These different pathways, and the summit being, this connecting time with God. And in our personal and corporate relationship with Jesus, there's these options. It's not just the common ones, like musical worship is a common pathway that we take to connect and relate with God. Reading our Bible, usually in more of a solitude kind of setting, quiet prayer, that sort of thing. Sometimes serving projects, sometimes a small group. These are some of the common pathways, and those in themselves show us that there are different ways, because some people, you know, on a given Sunday morning, you have some people go like, I really connect with the worship time, and others go, I really connect with the teaching. Could care less about the worship time. You know, that in itself says, you know, it's this idea where some pathways are more natural for us than others, and God says, you know, I've created all this diversity in people. I've also created diversity in how I want to relate with them. And this is huge, I think, because often, again, when we go to our programs, we kind of go to the typical, the common pathways. And then a few things happen there. The kids that is their natural pathway, they excel, you know, and we think highly of them, and they, you know, they flourish. The kids that want more of Jesus, but it's not a natural pathway for them, just don't get the opportunity. And that's heartbreaking. And so, you know, a really important read to go through that book, because it just really opens your eyes and shows you that you are enabled to provide opportunities outside, you know. And so other pathways that they talk about is, you know, is acts of service, and kind of acts of, you know, doing justice projects or actually behind the scenes service projects. There's also a huge one, and this is one that I find a lot of boys, girls too, but a lot of boys resonate with, is connecting with God in creation. Huge. Guys like being outdoors. They like, you know, and connecting with Jesus through a hike, or just, you know, one of my biggest ways that I connect with Jesus, every time I go snowboarding, I'm like, man, God, thank you that you made this for me. This is incredible. And it puts me in this position of worship, and that's, you know, that's exciting for me. And so, you know, with that, you know, I actually had another example is I had a youth who actually just was one of those kids. He had no interest in picking up his Bible. He had no interest in really just doing anything where you could get closer to God, but he had an interest in growing in his relationship. And so filtering through that, when we went through this sacred pathways, we found that with all that, as he realized, he's like, I love going out in nature. Like I go hang out and do like hikes like for hours, and you know, and through that, he's like, that's like, I'm connecting with God in that time, and I got to show him, yeah, that's how you connect with God, and that's, you're actually worshiping God when you acknowledge His creation and say, wow, this is incredible. That is you worshiping Him, and he was just blown away by that. He was like, you know, something brand new came to mind, and the next thing you know, he was doing it more, and he was doing it with an intentionality of having a relationship with God and actually growing it. And then the next thing you know, this kid that would have never had any interest in cracking open his Bible starts telling me, I went for a hike again, and I've been bringing my Bible lately, and I've been reading. And you're like this is amazing, like just crazy stuff like that, where, you know, where he's buying in and owning his faith because of the presentation of enabling, hey, there's different ways. You don't have to do the box way. And the reality is that the this cosmic being that's created everything, the most important, most powerful being in the entire universe, wants a relationship with you. Where else do we get that? I don't know about you, but I don't have the president calling me up and saying, hey, let's go golfing. I don't have you know, someone who I really appreciate, or people, you know, I ask my youth this all the time, you know, who's like one of the most important people to you, who's like, if you could hang out with anyone, who would it be? And you know, they all tell me, and then I tell them one of the people I would love to hang out with is Michael Bublé, and they all laugh at me, and then I beat them up. You know, you're like, yeah, I don't have Michael Bublé texting me like, hey, let's hang out this weekend. But whoever the most, you know, you've got the most powerful, most important being in all the universe saying, I want to hang out with you. Who wouldn't be chomping at the bit on that? And I think our kids actually are chomping on the bit on that. But what it comes down to is, well, what are we going to be doing? Because, even, if I'm scrapbooking with Michael Bublé, I'm not going to be that into it. If you're doing something that you don't enjoy with someone that you want to be with, it's just not going to be that impacting. It's not going to be something that you're going to want to do every day. And so that buy-in is huge in saying, find one of these pathways that you really connect, that's more natural for you, and work on that. And then from there, the maturity that grows is realizing that each pathway is important. There is importance to reading our Bible. There is importance to learning or doing worship or but those take a little bit more effort. And so start with your natural and use the momentum from your natural pathway to connect in these other ones. Because and we need to do this, because I even found after I read this book that I was pigeonholing my youth, trying to make them fit into something that they weren't. And I'd even known that my own relationship with God didn't flourish until I realized God made me unique. He made my relationship with Him unique. I need to explore that, and that's when I started to own my faith. And so, there's this empowerment. We all need to be shown value. We all need to be shown that there's value in our relationship with Jesus, and that we can enjoy it. It's meant to be a commitment, but it's not meant to be a chore. And there's a big difference there. Commitment is, there's tough times, but it's not this like to-do list, like, oh. And I think most of our youth, if they are honest, or our children as well, if they're honest with us, they think it's a chore. And I think we need to help them redefine that. So, the last thing, just to kind of conclude all this, is that, you as leaders that are listening to this, we have all had a significant impact by Jesus Christ. Somewhere along the way, we were taught a way we could buy in and own our faith, and we did, and that's a pivotal part of our life. That's why we're in the position that we're in. Most likely, that's why you're wanting to learn and grow and figure out more, because and from there, we aspire to provide an opportunity for our kids in our ministry to connect with Jesus as well. That's when we've really seen what Jesus has done in our lives and experienced that. Our desire is to show someone else that life transformation that we have gotten to be a part of, and so as children and youth ministers or leaders, we're wanting to do that for our kids, and that's and I come to you knowing that is your desire, because it's definitely not how much we get paid. It's definitely not because children and youth are always a pleasure to work with, because the reality is they take us for granted. They sometimes they just drive you nuts, but we'll go through all that because we want them to experience the love of Jesus, the transformation of Jesus. So how do we get boys and girls to buy in to what we're presenting so that they can own their faith? Speak their language, not the language we think they should speak. That's really what it comes down to, is speaking their language, not a language we think they should, not a language that we see as like, okay, the typical, what everyone else is doing, the way it's been done when I was a kid. We need to continue to be aware of what's going on, and continue to listen to God and say, how do you want me to be ministering to our kids in this context? Because He wants to show us, and and we need to speak the kids' language, because that's the way they'll buy in, that's the way they'll understand, that's the way we can pique their interest, and then for them to then own it themselves. And what it comes down to is when you do your due diligence to open those doors of interest, God does His part and transforms these little punks we pull our hair out thinking about at times, he transforms them into genuine followers who want to make a difference in another person's life, in another punk's life, because they now see the value in passing on God's love. When we do all our due diligence in this, our learning as best we can, God does all the background work. And anytime that we can try, and he helps us all the way through it. But we are called to do our due diligence. And, kind of one of the cool stories that I've seen that as myself is when I first started at the church that I'm at, I had a guy who was just a nuisance. Like, I couldn't get him to focus for more than 2 minutes. And you're thinking, how do I build a disciple out of you? How do I make you own this when I can't even get you to sit for a moment to listen? And through his middle school time, and then he moved on to high school, and just through working with the high school leader and different leaders and stuff, we were able to continue to focus on trying to get him to buy in. And eventually he did, and he owned his faith to a point where he himself decided, I want to make a difference as well, and I want to do it for youth as well. And so then he went on to Bible college, and he's currently in Bible college. And then it's like, yeah, I want to hop on a team, and I want to be a part of doing this. And so this one kid that I thought, I don't even know if I'm ever going to be able to help you own your faith, has come along, has come to a point where he's bought in and owned it, and is now trying to show someone who he was like that, he was in that very spot to own their faith, to buy in and own it. And that's exciting. That's the work that we get to be a part of because of God's grace. And so, and that's where I've learned, it's fun doing this together. Now I get to do this alongside this leader, and that's something I'm even interested in doing with you. Is let's do this together. If you have things that work well, and concepts that I haven't mentioned, that you're like, yeah, this is something that I've learned along the way. This is a continual learning experience for both of us. This is something that we can learn. It's a continual road of learning, and it's more fun, I find, to learn alongside of each other. No one's got the monopoly on any of this, and so I would love the dialogue to continue. My email is Chris, CHRIS, at clcc.ca, and would love to get emails from you, and just to whether you have more questions or dialogue. Would just be more than interested in keeping this conversation going. And so that's what I'm excited about, and hopefully this helps.